All right, so let's take a look at how to refactor the way that we're connecting and interacting with our Mongo database so that we can actually access it from inside our routes, which are now being defined as objects. So the basic strategy here, it's not really going to be that complicated. What we're going to do is have a special DB file, which will contain a few key methods that will allow us to do things like initialize the database connection and then get access to it from inside our routes just by importing it. So we're just going to create like a DB file. We'll probably just call it something like db.js. And this, as I said, will have a function that will be exported to initialize the database, and it'll also probably just export a DB similar to this notes DB thing so that we can just import that into our routes and use it straight away. All right, so let's take a look at what that's going to look like. I'm going to create that new file that I just talked about inside source. We're going to say new file, and we'll say db.js. And basically what we're going to do is move all of the logic that we had inside of here for connecting to MongoDB, right? Everything basically from just this part here. And we're going to paste it in there, and of course that means we'll have to say import Mongo client from MongoDB. And then, as I said, we're going to export a function that will actually initialize this connection, right? We can't just initialize this connection right inside the file because it's got this await keyword, okay? So we need to have it inside an asynchronous function. So what that's going to be called, we're just going to say export const, and we'll call this initialize DB connection, right? Something like that should be good. And that'll just be an async function that takes this thing and connects to it. All right, and in order to make this connection accessible from other files, what we're going to do is we're going to store this connection, right, our client here, as a variable inside this file. So we'll say something like let client equal, and then we'll just set it to something like null at first. And then, instead of declaring a new constant inside here, we're just going to set that client variable to the MongoDB connection. All right, now what this will allow us to do is take this notesDB thing and export that by saying export const notesDB equals clientDB blah, 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 blah. And now what we'll be able to do is inside our route files, we'll just be able to say something like import notesDB from DB. Okay, and that should make everything work. Now, one thing we do have to remember to do is actually call that initialize DB connection function from inside our server, but that's typically a lot easier than having to import Mongo client and type out all that code. So let's just import initialize DB connection from DB. And then at the top of this asynchronous function here, we're going to say initialize DB connection. And of course, that's asynchronous, so we're going to have to say await before that. We're going to want to actually wait for that to start up before we start our server. And now we should be able to just move all of our route logic into these sort of route configuration objects, right? We can uncomment this stuff that we had here, and that should all work perfectly well now. So let's do the same thing now for our other routes. We're gonna, I guess we'll just start with our create route, why not? So we'll go into our create route. What this route configuration object is gonna look like, we're gonna say export const create note route equals, and this thing is also going to import the notesDB thing, of course, from DB. And the path here is going to be /notes. The method here is going to be post. And the handler here is going to be the handler that we defined inside the server.js file. So we'll say async request response. And we can just copy and paste that code from server. All right, so we're going to take everything that's inside here. We're going to cut it out, and we're going to paste it inside here. Oops, I pasted it wrong, I suppose. Let's try that again. There we go. We're going to copy that, paste it in there, and there we have it. Our create note route is now inside an object like this. So we're going to actually delete this route and the get routes. There we go. And the next one up is going to be the update route. So let's open up our update note route file that we created. And inside here, we're going to say export const update note route equals the path here, of course, is going to be /notes/note ID. The method here is going to be put, and the handler here, we're going to copy and paste that like we did in our other routes. We're going to say, we're going to go back to server.js here, and we're going to take everything from inside of there, cut it, and put it inside this handler function now. Awesome. And last but not least, let's do our delete route. So that one's going to look just like the other one. You're probably getting the hang of this by now. We'll say export const delete note route equals. The path here is going to be /note/ or /notes/note ID. The method here is going to be a delete route. And the handler here is going to be async request response. And let's copy and paste that delete logic from our server. We're just going to take that all from here and put it in delete note routes handler. Okay, and this is also going to require us, I almost forgot, to import the notesDB from our DB file. So notesDB from /db. Same thing we're going to have to do in our update note route. I think I forgot it in here. Yep, sure enough I did. And our create note route already has it. Cool, so that's all of the configuration objects for our different routes. So the last thing we need to do here is export those from our routes index.js file in this array so that they'll automatically get added to our server. So as you can see, after we remove all of that other logic, our server file is actually pretty small, which is a good thing. Right, having all of the logic in its own segregated files like we do in our routes here is definitely preferable to what we were doing before where we had all of the route logic in the same exact file. And it looks like I forgot this UUID thing. We need that for our create note route, so I'll just paste that up there. And then back in our index.js file, we just need to import the rest of our routes here. In fact, let's hope that that'll do it for us. We're going to say, I'm going to try and just add this here, create note route. Yep, that was imported for me. Delete note route, same thing. Update note route, and that is all of the routes for our application. So let's try running this thing again, and I may have made some kind of mistake here. We'll just have to wait and see. We're going to say npm run dev inside our notes app. You can see I almost typed npm run start again. And oops, it looks like we're getting some kind of error for our server here. It's saying client.db, blah, 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 blah. And that's happening inside our db.js file. So let's see what's going on here. So what we're going to need to do here actually is we're going to need to change this to a variable and say export let notesDB. And that's going to be equal to null initially as well. And down in here is where we're actually going to set notesDB to something. Oops. Let me try that again. NotesDB equals, and then we can paste that there. So that hopefully should work better. Let me just take a look and see if that's working. In the terminal here. Yep, sure enough, it looks like our server's working. So let's go to our front end in the browser here and test this out. So it looks like we currently have no notes. So let's try adding a note here. We'll say, does this work? If we click create now, whoa, it's looking like we suddenly have 2 notes. Let's take a look at our database and see what the ideal value should be. We're just going to say db.notes.find. I still have the shell open. And sure enough, we see that there are 2 notes, so I don't know why we were only seeing one beforehand. Maybe that was just an artifact left over. All right, so it looks like creating a new note works. Let's click on one of these things and see if editing a note works. We're just going to add in some stuff here. We'll say it looks like it. Click Save Changes. And sure enough, that updating apparently works as well. So let's just try deleting a note here. We're going to delete our does this work note. Say yes. And sure enough, it's gone. So everything looks like it's still working, and our server is in a much more manageable state at this point. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.